Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the March 25th, 2024 Community Recovery Fund Advisory Committee meeting. Okay, we haven't met since December, and I guess one way to think of this meeting is we're just catching up on business. There's a couple of things that have accumulated over those months. So let's see how it goes. We have we might move things around a bit. In fact, we will move things around a bit because we have 3 projects that we're dealing with that requested a change in the scope that I thought was significant enough that it needed to come before the committee. So I'd like to get those on first before we do the other business, if that's okay with everybody. And one of those projects is through the Chamber of Commerce, and through no fault of theirs, no fault of anybody's really, just the timing of things. We just found out about this one the other day. So that's why it wasn't on the printed agenda. And I just notified the Chamber of Commerce about this over the weekend. So they're going to squeeze in a little bit of time, sometime in the next half hour, to join this meeting. So as soon as they appear on our Zoom, I would like to switch over and do that agenda item at that time. Very, very trippy.
Technical difficulties.
Okay, so I hope that's okay with everyone, this flexibility and moving things around.
Sure.
Okay, so, and we do have Tracy Verrier here from MRB Group. Tracy, is there anything you wanted to say before we go into the specific projects so that we can let people that need to be here for those meetings move on to the rest of their day?
No, by all means, let's do it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, there have been quite a few requests to change the scope of the projects that we awarded money for, and on each one of them we made a quick decision. Is this a minor thing that doesn't need widespread approval, or is this something that's significant enough that we should probably have the committee look at it? And we ended up with 3 of those. So we're going to go through each one of those and decide on whether we're good with the change of scope or not. And for the first one, let us go with the Human Services Coalition, who we have 2 people here. If you want to come on up to the table somewhere, maybe there's 2 seats over there, or wherever you're comfortable. Whatever, anywhere you want.
Wherever.
Truthfully. Yep. Okay.
And just put your microphone about 6 inches from your face, and yeah.
Okay, so the details on this one start on package page 7, I believe. Is that right? Nope, 6. And I'll try to do my summary of it, but you feel free to do your summary as well. Which is, originally, this was going to be a project to help people that are, and it still is, a project that's helping people transitioning from homelessness to actually having an apartment. It was going to be both kind of social worker type help, but also physically pots and pans kind of help. And the idea was to hire an outside person to do this for this population moving into several locations, different locations. Human Services Coalition was unable to find an agency or a person willing to do that. And so the revised scope would be just to have it be through the Vecino Group, is that right? Yep. Who has 2 big housing projects that fit this category. So the scope would be changing it from people moving into a variety of locations into just the Vecino units, and that also the Vecino person would be handling the pots and pans end of it. So, how did I do?
You did great.
Okay, thank you. So, again, because it was just a big enough change that I thought it would be worthwhile for this committee to weigh in on it. So, committee, do you have any thoughts about this? Any questions or comments? Concerns? Deborah?
Yeah, I always have thoughts and concerns. What concerns me about this is that even though the organization that would be nominally employing this person is supposed to be a mission-driven, not-for-profit arm of the Vecino Group. It's still an arm of the Vecino Group, which is a private developer. And I am concerned about providing money to the arm of a private developer for the benefit of people who are moving in only to that private developer's facilities. So I'm really not looking on this very favorably.
Other committee members?
Is there a way, or is there possibilities to expand other groups that this person is working with over time? Or is it just them? I understand what Deb is saying,
Yeah.
we're paying for somebody's staff.
Sure. I also understand, oh, I'm very loud. The concern that's stated, I think when I can think of a lot of reasons to have that concern. I think when I think about it in practice, what it looks like in our community is additional supports being built in to a property that has a known high level of need. And whether or not the government or the private developer could or should be funding that, I think that this is an innovative and time-limited way to test whether it impacts the outcomes for the persons who are living in those properties. So the properties specifically are Art House and Asteri. So we all know that there's been a lot of public conversation about issues in those spaces. And while I also wish that the privately funded developers were bringing additional solutions to bear, I think that opening the door to like creating this kind of position is the pilot that could have it become further supported by the developer. I don't know. I get it, but there's also hundreds of people living in those spaces, and so this is to the benefit of the people who will be served by the position and not necessarily the employer, is the way I would look at it.
That's one way to look at it.
It is one way. I mean, it is one way to look at it, yeah. and I understand the concern.
What kind of, do you have checks and balances? Do you have something in place for that?
Sure. I mean, what are we looking to check or balance? Because what is built in is increased engagement with the not-for-profit community. So you can see some of the metrics include, so the original vision for this whole project was to create a network of people with a skill set that are sort of placed at different organizations and agencies across the community that are all working together. So this person does have an expectation to check in with the 211 housing specialist, as well as the permanent supportive housing staff for the ESHI units that are in those projects. And so it's designed to build community in that way. In terms of fiscal checks and balances, I'm not sure how to answer that question, but I could maybe.
I would say that there are administrative checks and balances because the COC is keeping a very close eye on this particular position because of the potential impact and because it's new and because we want to be good fiscal stewards of this money. Yeah. So I do think there's going to be oversight and again, the intent is really to integrate this into our network. So it's not like they're going to be out there doing Vecino Group stuff.
And they don't work for property management.
Right.
So, there are, I know it's hard to envision that there really are like separations.
Chinese walls?
Well, I think, to be honest, based on my understanding of how these properties work and interact, I think it will be a real benefit really to everybody to have somebody who is not property management and is not permanent supportive housing staff in these spaces to have a different role. Mm-hmm. So this person will be employed by the Vecino Group supportive housing person, and so they're not going to be like rent collectors or doing property management roles really at all. Their first role is to be like what we're calling a resource concierge, but also just making sure that people know that they're there, that there are supports available in community and in the building for them, things like a cleaning supply closet, stuff like that. Help with trash tags, what happens if you lose your key fob, all of those sort of many small things. The tenants will have somebody other than property management that they can go right to, is sort of the idea.
So I just want to say, Jennifer, we do see you, and we'll get to you as quickly as we can. And I see Mike Sigler has his hand up. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just wondering, I mean, with all the bad press that Latino Group's gotten over, well, let's just take the Art House property. It really doesn't have anybody that's doing this. I mean,
that's
it
correct.
Sounds like there is a property management person. Mm-hmm. It would just seem like they would hire somebody who was more in line with what you're talking about than just a property manager for some other company.
Yeah, I don't think that's currently in the scope of the way that they are using property management in that space.
Got Travis, then Deborah.
So to me, two things would make this palatable for me. Either one, if we were saying that this is a pilot to start here and we're going to expand to Poets Landing, we're going to expand to West Village, and we want to do this as a 6-month pilot here, and the whole goal is to expand it, and it would make more sense to me. Or if this is a temporary solution until Facino gets their funds together, because I do think, given the fact that they design these properties for different clusters of people with different needs, that this should have been something they planned into their business model. And it doesn't exist right now, and we're offering that off of this. So those would be two solutions to me that would make me feel much better about voting for something like this.
It's definitely more about the first example that you said in terms of like creating a model and scaling. There's it didn't come out of nowhere, and it isn't actually just a reaction to any of the press around Art House, but really came from the work of some of the committees of the COC who identified that in housing in general, there's a need for somebody who's sort of quickly available with person-centered services to meet those small needs so they don't become big needs. That's been identified across all those properties that you mentioned, and this is sort of a way to test that theory. That's more the gearing of it than like, let's see if Vecino Group wants to do it. Of course, I think Vecino Group should do it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some other affordable housing properties that are also sort of coming along in a similar model right now, alongside at the same time developing similar positions. So the hope is that we'll all learn together. And we did, I will say that the first goal was for this to be in a community, not-for-profit kind of setting. And a RFP was issued, and it was, you know, all of the same information was put out for folks. And there was no not-for-profit that was able, willing, had capacity to work as this move-in specialist kind of position. So that's how we ended up changing gears in this way. It certainly did go to not-for-profits first.
Okay, I've got Deborah, then Mike Sigler.
Yeah, and I appreciate that residents will be helped by this, but my concern remains that what tends to happen when government steps in and provides a program that benefits, peripherally at least, private organizations or, you know, a developer who should be planning for this, as Travis notes, that once that government subsidized or funded program is in place, it's very difficult to get the developer or the private organizations to step up and say, yeah, this should be our role. And it also concerns me, you've got $70,000 that's going to be going into the first year of this FTE. What happens at the end of that first year? Does Vecino now join the list of organizations that comes to the county every year for funding in our budget process? I don't want to see that.
Yes, yes to all of those things. That being said, I think you could probably make that argument for any TCRF funding. So I think the rewards are significantly larger than the risk here. And I do think the impact and the payoff to doing this based on so much data and evidence we already have, as this is such a significant gap in our system in housing retention and housing security, that based on the amount of money and the fact that we have a willing partner, a willing not-for-profit partner, I would make the argument that it is a small investment for a significantly, potentially large payoff.
Got Mike Sigler, then Veronica.
So my concerns are along the lines of Deborah's, though, is that this really is something, I don't understand how the developer's not building this into their business plan. I mean, so now this is this art house, but I mean, they're a pretty major developer of this, and they're going to be opening a lot more units in Ithaca shortly. And it sounds like that they don't have a plan for this. I mean, from what I'm hearing, yeah, I think that this person probably will be successful, but then guess what? Then this next, 200 units that are going to be opening, then they're going to need a person. And I don't know, it just seems like this could expand very quickly beyond the capacity of what the county can do.
Just as a minor clarification, this person, now I'm not loud at all.
Don't worry about it.
I don't know. This person will serve both Art House and Asteri projects for the time that they are funded, right? So I know it's a pilot, I know it has an end date, but they're actually able to serve both any new persons who meet the priority population who move into the Art House property, and then any people who meet the priority population who are moving into Asteri, just for that clarification. So there's 182 units or 140 units of affordable housing in Asteri. Some percentage of them will be people who meet the population aimed to be served by this position. They're eligible, and then anybody new moving into Art House once the position is online.
Veronica.
Thanks. I appreciate the questions being asked and concerns being raised, and I'm not hearing any concerns that rise to the level of we shouldn't approve this based on the benefit you're saying it'll give. I have a couple of questions, and I'm sorry I arrived late, so maybe you already answered them, but can you say more about, the original plan was to have a person doing exactly this, and the only difference was they would be employed by who?
Well, that was always the question.
Okay.
A member of the Continuum of Care membership, so a COC member agency.
Unaffiliated with any particular developer or property.
Unaffiliated with a developer or property manager, yes.
The other difference would be they would
Well,
be transitioning people into a variety of housing.
they would, yeah. They would still
serve those properties.
They would still serve those properties. And like, for example, if TC Action had applied for this position, they are not unaffiliated with Vecino property. They're running the eShot units in there, and we would have considered them as a host for this role as well. But yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I think, I don't quite see why we wouldn't fund this or approve this change, because it sounds like, we talk about the need for supporting, helping the homelessness crisis all the time, and the need for, every time someone says housing first, someone says what second? This sounds like it's part of it. Do correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And I guess, it's unfortunate maybe that the position couldn't be housed exactly where we like, but I don't think that we shouldn't try it. And as for it being like the developer should have thought of this when going into the property management, sure, I guess, but like, I don't think INHS even has this position for their rental properties. Now, they might not be serving the same population, but they'd be evicting people, so things aren't going 100% hunky-dory all the time, and so I don't think it's like abnormal or weird that Vecino Group didn't create this position themselves, and I think it's okay to put some resources toward it and not wait for the developers to do so when our strapped for capacity nonprofits are not able to take it on right now.
Mike Sigler, you had your hand up while you were still on. It's very magical.
Yeah, but I mean, the people that are in this program, that are in this housing, Asteria, I mean, they're in our systems already, I would think. I mean, so while I appreciate what's being said, it's not like we've left these folks untethered. I mean, they have contact with our different systems. So now we're going to add another layer so that we can make sure that they're getting the services they need. But
maybe. I think the answer to that is maybe, because not all persons, one of the big conversations that happened actually after the art house move-in process was like, where are all the services for all these people, right? And that happened because we don't assume that all people experiencing homelessness have the highest level of need. And so persons who have that higher level of need are in the permanent supportive housing units. But there are certainly people who, by all measures, are able to stabilize in housing without a super high level of supports, but have a need for financial support. So those are people who tend to use things like housing choice vouchers to exit homelessness into housing. If a person is using just a regular old voucher that can go to any person earning 30% area median income or below, there's no expectation that case management services be provided to them. So people can access supports and services, but there is not like built-in supports and services for people using regular, just straight up affordable housing, paying their rent, using a voucher, having had an experience of homelessness. It just brings it closer to home for those people who, this isn't for the highest level of need people. This is for people who are moving into places like Asteria and Art House, who may have had an experience of homelessness in the past, might need some financial supports, but aren't in need of that like super duper case management. Does that make sense? Did I make that more confusing actually? Okay, because the people who need the highest level of supports in Art House are already getting it. The 40 young people who are in the Ishai units at Art House are doing fairly well as a population, according to the data. It's the other folks who aren't getting those support services who we hear are having a harder time.
I have Travis and Susan.
So I can't support this the way it's written. But if there was a plan added to this that said that this position would also serve over time or over the course of this next year while this pilot is happening, A, B, and C as well, then I would definitely support it. But I can't support it just for the Vecino Group. If others were added, I would be 150% behind this. So if those additions were added, I would be able to vote yes for this.
Susan.
I'm inclined to support this, but because what I'm hearing is this is an experiment.
Pilot, we call it.
A pilot. But I hear what Deborah is saying too, in that I agree that coming back and asking, things have a way of becoming habit to come back and ask questions, but it is an opportunity to do something different that would have great impact. So I'm inclined to support it.
That will meet a gap that we have identified in our system using data and evidence, both qualitative and quantitative.
But I also like Travis's
Agree with Travis.
suggestion
Yes.
too.
Yeah, me too.
I think we can talk about it, and I agree. I wanted this somewhere that was more, I think what will be harder is if we are seeing this high level of need across the community, that we need to make sure that there's somebody available to serve. I think it will be harder to balance the light touch, more intensive part of this role for a single FTE. I think we can figure it out, though, and we can come back to the drawing board around that. I think we could figure it out, but it would be confusing to figure out like the referral pathways and the prioritization and all of that if it was totally anybody. I do think the person will be serving the guests of tenants, which is a whole other population in these spaces that we don't talk about very often. But I know one thing I actually love hearing Tompkins Community Action say is like, the guests of our residents are our future tenant clients. And so this person will be able to serve the people who are guests of the tenants, as is, written as is, and say, okay, you're not living here, but how do we get you into housing if you're a longtime guest? But you're right, we can think about it.
Mike Sigler.
I just want to say that I'll probably vote for this in large part because the money's already been set aside, and if it wasn't, I probably wouldn't. In large part just because, I think that the developer here, I'm going to treat this as almost like a triage kind of thing, and that this person may be able to stem the tide of that triage. And going forward, I hope maybe the IDA will look at this, and I mean, they got significant money, the tax abatements to build this project. And if we need to put in a requirement at the IDA in developing and saying, listen, you're going to get this incentive, we can't have this situation where we have police there 3 or 4 times a day. I mean, that's an untenable situation to me. So, I mean, it's just eating up so many resources.
That sounds expensive.
Yeah. Well, and then they send a fire truck over too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, I don't disbelieve the pictures that I see that come out of there. And I don't know how much help this person will be. I mean, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I think that's something we need to actually sit down with the developer and try to work out, because they desperately do need more services. And and if they're going to be the one that's going to be one of the largest builders of this kind of housing, then okay, what partnership are you looking for here?
Imagine they're watching, so.
Deborah.
Yeah, and Mike raises a good point, because both of these projects, I know Asteri got significant support through IDA incentives. I can't recall if Art House did or not, but a selling point that they give to the IDA and what they stressed when they came to us for Asteri's incentives was we're filling a need for affordable and homeless housing. So if they're going to do that, and that's going to be a selling point, then they really need to take the laboring oar and cough up what it's going to take to service the needs of the people that they're trying to move in.
I'm going to take a turn. First of all, Mike, that was an excellent idea. I jotted that down, IDA requirement for move-in specialist. So I initially had the same reactions as some of you have had, Deborah, that there's a private developer and that it's only in certain housing, and that's a limitation. But I got beyond that because I believe there is no Plan C right now. Right? This was Plan B. Plan A would have been preferable to the original, but we have Plan B that's pretty good. We don't have a Plan C, so I think so I will support this. I think Human Services Coalition has heard loud and clear that we would like to see more of this and other people pay for it. I'm sure that they've already thought of that ahead of us. Human Services Coalition has a good track record of building these partnerships and getting grants and finding funding. So I'm confident that it's on their work plan now too to think about how to go forward with this kind of idea. I did also consider that the one-time nature of this, but when we did the Community Recovery Fund, we tried not to do too many one-time things, but we did do quite a few as well, and this was one of them. I guess with the idea of an experiment, a pilot, see how it works, et cetera. So that's how I'm thinking of this one. And then the last point I wanted to make is that we have probably over 100 people that are on the cusp of moving in. Is that right? It's like, it's happening now.
It's
and
happening.
in the next few months. So this feels really good to me that we need this. So that's where I'm at. Any other comments? Veronica.
Quickly, I also liked Mike's suggestion of if we don't like what the developer did after their promises with the IDA for this one, people are moving in, so let's go over to supporting this, but some kind of restriction on what they need to provide if they're going to get an IDA tax break. I mean, that's a theme that comes up over and over. And just, I appreciate, Liddy, what you said about this person being able to help the guests of the tenants, because I had not thought of that, but that's a huge population, largely in great need as well. And that's exciting that someone could be just not like officially in the housing projects system and yet getting supported.
Okay, are we ready for a vote then?
I do have a question.
Oh, sure.
Liddy, you did say that it might be something that you can add, right? The last thing I said?
Yeah.
All right, cool. That's good enough for me. I do want to say I did speak to the folks from Asteri, and this was something that was going to be baked in. They had this covered. This is what they were going to do. So I think that your point is correct, that Mike, that when they go to the IDA people in the future, it has to be part of it, because it's easy to say we're going to do these things. Poets Landing was going to hire A, B, and C, and they haven't been able to do that. Part of it is not being able to find people to do some things, right? So it affects everybody. It affects the community. I believe these folks in these positions have to be in place. Right now, we have an employment shortage, so it is hard to get folks in there. But we can't have the type of care we're looking for in these units if the developers aren't playing a role in that. So I do appreciate that, and I do appreciate you saying that, it's possible to work in other agencies. You'll go back and look at that, so I would give it a yes.
Okay, are we ready for a vote? So we're going to vote on whether to approve the change of scope. So yes means that we're approving the change of scope. Everybody's in the room now, right? So we can just raise our hands. Okay, all in favor of this change? Opposed? Okay, that passes 5-1. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Human Services.
Thank you.
For what you're doing. And
Sorry I broke your microphone.
all good.
It's just fine.
Before. I got it, yeah, just.
Okay, so we have Jennifer Tavares from the Chamber of Commerce, who I know is double booked right now. So sorry, Jennifer, and thank you for squeezing us in. This one may generate less conversation. I don't know.
Who? Oh.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it. Okay, so this change of scope is much less grand. I thought it was right on the edge, and since we were having this meeting anyway, I thought it would be worthwhile to put on the agenda. So we all have we got an email, and here's a piece of paper in front of us that tells us what the category changes are for the spending. Jennifer, do you want to say anything more about it before we have the legislators talk?
Oh goodness, my screen just, I see you put that up there, great, thanks. Well, essentially, just based on the circumstances on the ground related to implementing this project from the time it was initially awarded to now, some people may be aware that Tracy facilitated an extension for us. Part of the transition here has to do with the work that is needed versus what was initially scoped out. I did my best with the original scope based on what we thought everything required at the time, but some things have shifted. One being that to facilitate reconstructing and redeveloping content on the website, that's a bit of a bigger project than we had hoped, and a couple of the contractors we had intended to work with on that were unable to take the project. So that's one reason for the shift. The other is, many of you may be familiar with the community relocation guides, which are supportive of local employers receiving new candidates into the community, developing their workforce, helping them get to know all of our communities and the great attributes that we have throughout Tompkins County. A lot of work was done last year to get these republished, reprinted. We actually needed to print more than we originally had intended. We doubled the amount, and I'm actually happy to say we've already handed half of what we printed out. So they were in high demand, they were needed, they have been distributed in the community. And so really just shifting some of what we had intended on contracting with consultants and shifting some of the marketing spend from advertising to supporting the relocation guide need and the content development needs associated with that, and then trying to ensure that we can maintain a resilient website, et cetera. We also are working with a couple of different consultants now that were available to us last year, 6 to 9 months ago. So I actually think we're in a pretty promising place to execute what we said we would, and also still have these additional benefits along the way of fresh relocation guides and getting them out in the community. So happy to answer any other questions, but that's sort of the gist of why we asked to shift some of the funds around.
Very good. Thank you, Jennifer. Questions or comments? Deborah?
Yeah, I just had one question, Jennifer. I noticed that there was about a $300 increase in the overall cost of the program, and I assume that the chamber's just going to pick up that additional.
I actually think that's just a transposition error, possibly.
Yeah.
We certainly
Probably
are
just
contributing both in-kind staff time and likely more dollars than what you see here in this budget, but I think that's just two numbers got swapped around, actually, so the budget should be cost neutral.
So it's not an overall.
And I can agree with what you said. Any cost in addition to what the county award is, we are certainly absorbing those here.
I figured.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Tracy, did you want to say something about that?
No, I was just saying, yeah, it does look like I just flipped a couple numbers. Sorry about that.
Problem. Any other questions or comments? Okay, ready to vote on this one? Again, we're voting whether or not to approve the change of scope. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Jennifer, sorry to make your day even busier.
No problem. I appreciate you giving me a heads up. And I do just want to say, if anyone in that room or the county needs any cases of relocation guides, please let us know. I want to be sure we get some in the right hands.
If you could send, if you could send at least one over, we'll leave it on top of the mailbox so everyone could just kind of glance at it. That would be great.
Okay. Yes, I'll definitely send at least one over.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one.
Two. All right, we're going to go back into the order of the agenda now. We already did the changes to the agenda. Minutes approval. Somebody want to move the minutes from December 4th? Travis moves. Susan seconds. Discussion? All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Contracting updates. Okay, Tracy, I think we're back to you now.
Yeah. So there have actually, since your packets went out last week, there has been one substantial update, is that the Cayuga Addiction Recovery Services has decided not to withdraw. So they are, we're in the process of working with them to get their project moving. So there's actually only 2 withdrawn projects at this point. Everything else is, so that CARS project moved to fully executed. Everything else is still updated, but is still the same. So those 2 lines were updated to reflect that. Spending progress, we have between those 2 withdrawn projects, which were Ithaca Media Arts. That was a $6,000 project they decided not to move forward with. Wells College also withdrew. Their contract was for $10,663. That was a decision they made internally due to some issues they were having with recruiting students for the timeframes that they were looking at, and now they're building some new partnerships, so they're rethinking how they want to do these programs and didn't feel it was fair to keep dragging the TCRF along, and also they weren't sure that once they came to a conclusion that it would be within the guidelines of the program, so they felt it was better just to do the planning that they need to do and start from scratch, as opposed to trying to fit their new program into this, and thought it was only fair to release the funds. So those are the two that have withdrawn. There are 3
Tracy, could you, I'm
projects
sorry.
that have also slightly underspent their contracts. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
I was just wondering, can you tell us again what the total for the withdrawn projects is? Is it like 16,000 or something?
16,663 withdrawn.
And what was the other one besides Wells College?
Ithaca Media Arts.
Okay, thank you.
And then there's 3 projects that just very slightly underspent their contracts. They just came in under budget, one by $95, 2 others by about $5 each. So there's just these like little pieces of funds that are at the end of a project hanging out. So total unallocated right now is $16,758.54. So that's later on in the agenda, we have a conversation about allocation of funds, but that's the amount that we're talking about at this point. You know, there could be little small amounts like this moving forward, but that's the amount that we're talking about right now.
Can we just pause to appreciate what an amazing number that is? I mean, I know it can change later on,
Out of
but
6.3 million.
yeah, like good for us, good for you, good for everybody.
Of course, we still have $1.5 million kind of up in the air.
There are some possibilities going forward for sure.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I just wanted to note is that I've been working with Norma to start putting a dashboard together, and I'll just pop this up really quick so that you can see it. But basically, the idea is to, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is on the Tompkins County website. This is through the OpenGov software. And right now, we just kind of have basic charts and data about the status of projects, the spending progress. It shows how much was dispersed or has been dispersed thus far. And then it shows the projects by kind of a primary and secondary category and the spending associated with those. So this is something to take a look at. We're working on putting together some additional charts regarding metrics and outcomes, but that's still in the works now that we're a year into projects. We have enough reports that we can really start looking at that and pushing that back out. So just a heads up that this is out there now, and we're going to continue working on this.
Can we pause there for a second? Norma, did you want to say anything more about the dashboard? Or I know you had a role in it too. Okay, I thought it looked great. Yeah, Tracy, before we keep going on, is there any committee members want to say anything yet? Okay, Tracy, you're still on.
So that's all I have on contract status right now. So
Okay.
I'm good.
Great. Okay, next up is reporting and vouchers update. Who's going to be doing that?
I can start that. So Samantha, we've had a little bit of a switch in the personnel on how this is working. So Samantha and her office are now working on the vouchering and collecting that data and getting it through to the finance department for disbursements. Scott has been, we've decided that we could streamline the process, so Scott's no longer involved in that process. And so moving forward, now that we're in the full kind of projects moving forward, it felt like a good time to make that swap. And so she is now, Samantha and her team are now working on that. You know, I think in the dashboard you saw, or in your reporting, you saw that over almost $1.7 million has been dispersed already. And, you know, we're getting all of those quarterly reports into one place at this point, because some have gone to Samantha, some went to Scott, some came to me. So now we're just getting all of those things in one place. But that's where we are. We're really, Samantha's really pushing out those disbursements and trying to make sure that the awarded projects are getting their funds in a timely manner.
Samantha, did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, she pretty much covered it.
Committee members, any questions or comments at this point? Deborah?
Yeah, I just want to say that $6.3 million is a lot of money. And I can't remember how many projects we actually funded, but this has been a lot of administrative monitoring, implementation work, and I want to thank Tracy and her organization and Samantha and Norma, and I also think that some credit is due to the organizations that received these grants and have been so compliant and careful about providing Tracy and our admin people with the information that we need on a timely basis to get their money to them.
I'll second all that. I'm on, we're on these update calls where we're calling conference calls every 2 weeks to check in about this stuff. And so I get to hear a lot of what's going on behind the scenes, and it's just so impressive. Thank you, thank you. It's out of my wheelhouse to do that kind of stuff. So. All right. Project scope amendment. So we did the two that were present in the room. That's why we moved them up. There was one more that I needed to talk about a little bit. It's no más lágrimas, and we had allocated, was it 80,000, I think? 60,000?
40.
40, okay, sorry. We had allocated $40,000, and that was going to buy a van and kitchen equipment and some money for participants. And then a few months ago, maybe 2 months ago, they notified us that they weren't able to buy the van and that they wanted to move the money around in some pretty big ways. And so I spoke with them and said it was going to come before this committee, so it wasn't my decision, but that my impression was that size of that change of scope was, for me at least personally, was problematic, and that it was going to be converted into a lot of gift cards and intern payments. And that for me personally, getting rid of a van, not doing the van, which would have been a transformative item for their program, it would have lasted, 5, 7, 9 years, whatever the vans last, was going to be a major impact. And that if that wasn't what they were going to use the money for, I wasn't sure that I could support that. So they heard that and they went back to the drawing board, and they are now intending to buy the van again. Yes, I think that's good news. However, I thought it would still worthwhile to leave it on the agenda because that was Dan Klein talking. I just want to make sure other people felt similarly so that if this comes up again, I'm able to talk with a little more confidence that I'm speaking on behalf of the majority of the committee. I hope that made sense. Deborah.
Yeah, I agree, Dan. It concerned me. The van is something, like, for the lack of a better word, sustainable. I mean, it's an investment that lasts for several years. When I looked at the proposal that came through, over $30,000, almost $31,000 actually of the 40 was going to stipends, gift cards, and rent. And what concerned me about that was, first of all, that's all going to be gone in a year. And looking back on the deliberative process that we as a committee used last year, we eliminated and rejected a lot of applications because they were only going to pay 1 year's expenses, and we didn't see how going forward that would really make a difference. So I'm happy to hear that they're back on the hunt for a van, because I don't think I could have voted for the changes that they wanted to make.
Other comments? Travis agrees. Veronica.
I guess this is a question, not a comment. Do you know anything about what were their difficulties in purchasing a van, and what's changed between then and now that they're back on the hunt?
So they are, I hope this is not an insult, they're a real shoestring organization. They don't have a lot of resources. There is some complications in them buying the van, but we're holding the money, and that's all workable. But they were just, I think they were a little, maybe a little intimidated by that process. I think those two are the main reasons. And so when I told them that it was my sense that I had those concerns, that I had sensed other people might have those same concerns, they decided, okay, we will overcome those obstacles and make this happen. Any other questions or comments? Okay, then good. I have more confidence now that I'm speaking on behalf of a majority of the committee. All right. Available funding discussion. So Tracy already telegraphed some of this, but I think there's a little more to say. Norma, do you have something would you like to start us on this?
Well, one of the requests that I had to use some of the available funding was to, because we're taking over more of the administrative expenses, it does take a little more time from our staff in county administration. Samantha and our secretary, Ann, are both taking up a little more responsibility, and it's taking a little more time. So what I was hoping was that the legislature would approve our using some of these funds to cover overtime expenses. And it is an allowable expense within the ARPA guidelines for us to be able to use those funds for administrative costs. We can align that with the rules and regulations. But that was just one of the areas. I don't think it's going to be a huge amount of money. We're talking probably, certainly not the full amount, maybe half of that. Throughout the
full amount being 16,000.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. So probably half of that to help us to cover overtime expenses for the remainder of the program.
I'll say a little more, and let me know if I'm off. As this program launched, we committed to, we have to, because it's ARPA money, track this money until it's all gone, all spent, and that's a several years process. And we knew from the beginning that MRB Group may not be with us that entire ride, that we would start taking over some of that work as it was, some of the tracking work, the further down the line it got. So we're not quite there yet, but we're transitioning into that. And so we are now taking on more of this tracking, and that's what that money would be for. How did that come out?
That was, yes, thank you for adding that in, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Questions or comments? Deborah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with that request. Most grant programs provide some money for compliance and monitoring and administration, and if some of that's internal, then I think that's a valid use of the money as long as it's okay under ARPA. I mean, $16,000 is not a humongous amount of money. If something goes belly up with one of the larger grants that's still kind of out there, then we have to come back and figure out how we're going to push that money out to the community. But for this amount of money, I don't have a problem with Norma's request.
You just add in too, thank you, Deborah, because part of the other thing to consider is whenever we're going, if we go out and start adding more projects, we've also added more work on both Tracy and our staff and county administration. So yeah, if you can align even the balance of this toward administrative expenses, and then we're kind of covered for ongoing costs.
Right, that's a good point. What would be involved in redistributing $16,000? That's a lot of work. You know, it's not a lot of money though. So, and as Deborah pointed out, if it becomes more money, then yes, of course, we have to have a different conversation. Other questions or comments? Well, would it be appropriate then to have a motion to allocate $16,000 towards administrative expenses?
I would make that motion.
Deborah moved, Travis second. Is that, I kind of jumped the gun there. I want to make sure that sounds right to both of you.
To us, yes,
yeah.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. I just couldn't make that. I would have made the motion if I could have.
Okay, discussion on that motion then. Veronica.
But just to be clear, it's for $16,000, not $16,753.54.
My instinct is to just call it 16, but or to do.
Well, the question I suppose would be then what happens to the rest of it? So it might make sense to take the entire unallocated balance. And
Yes, do we expect more little bits and bobs of dollars to show up later?
I don't think there's any way of knowing.
there is no way.
Just start
yeah.
with this. We could start with this, yeah.
Yeah, you could do 16 and then leave the balance in there, and we'll deal with it when it
If there are
comes.
bits and bobs, then the committee goes out to lunch, right?
Well, I'm persuaded by what you said. I think we should go to the maximum we have now, and if there are more bits and bobs later, we can
Yep.
decide what to do
I
with
will
that.
consider that
I've
a
never heard the term bits and bobs before,
friendly,
but-
it's very British. I'll consider that a friendly amendment.
Okay, beautiful. Any objections to that amendment? Everyone's good? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to expend 16, can someone give me that number again, please?
Looks like 16,000, this is not the right one, 16,758, right, Tracy?
Yes.
Is the change
54
right, 54 cents, or?
Let's not do that.
All right.
Is it, I'm sorry, is that okay, 16,758?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the motion is to take 16,758 and apply it towards county administrative functions. We have a motion, we have a second. Any more discussion? All right, let's have a vote. All in favor? That is unanimous. Very good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Did we cover everything on the agenda?
Did we move, I can't remember if we approved the minutes.
Did.
We did.
Okay.
Okay, any last business? Going once, going twice? All right, well, thank you, everybody. We'll probably meet again in a couple of months or sooner as needed. But this was really good. I feel like we're caught up. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Norma. Thank you, committee. See you next time.
Thank you, Dan.